Welcome to the Journey to Prosperity for All, a program where we look at, celebrate, and reflect the activities of the PPPC government in office since 2020. I'm your host, Shaquan Gill, and for this discussion, I have the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, Minister Gail Teixeira. Minister, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Minister, as we start our conversation, it is important that I ask you, what was the state of governance like upon your assumption of office in 2020?
Well, I think we can all start off with what happened in the elections, and that's an indication of governance, that the issue of democracy, human rights, the will of the people were being thwarted. And in fact, the former government, and particularly the former president, had the highest numbers of cases in court in the entire region for executive lawlessness, where he had violated the Constitution at various levels, where the judiciary ruled, including the Caribbean Court of Justice. And the one example I'll give is with the appointment of the chairman of GCOM, done unilaterally in contravention to the Constitution, so that we came into a situation where the people's will was victorious and democracy prevailed. And so you start off with the whole issue that the constitutional rule of order is what this government's going to be about, and that the upholding of democracy, human rights, and dealing with inclusion and participation, which you had a society which was fractured based on the behavior of the former government. And so this new ministry it's a brand new ministry. In fact, it's one of the few in the world. I think it's an experiment of President Ali, and I hope I don't fail him. But the whole idea of actually having a sector in a government that's looking at parliamentary affairs and governance. And of course, part of my responsibility has been dealing with government business in Parliament. But a number of areas that I deal with constitutional appointments. Mm-hmm. And so the whole area of the engagement with Mr. Norton as leader of the opposition, and what has been happening with that, and his reluctance to engage with President Ali. So I have been the one that, because of my mandate, to engage with Mr. Norton, all by letters, of course, nothing else. I guess he won't shake my hand either. No skin off my nose, as they say. But the issue is that the issue of constitutional appointments. So some come through the Parliament. So we've been able to get the PPC appointed. We've been able to get the Police Service Commission. I believe there's no reason why Mr. Norton could not have agreed to the nominee that came from Parliament and was adopted, and the nominee that the President put up. So we could have the JSC up, the Judicial Service Commission up, which was expired in September 2017. Mm-hmm. It's unthinkable that you don't have a Judicial Service Commission, which is holding up appointment of judges, holding up a range of issues, and probably including disciplinary matters, who knows. The teaching service has also been held up, but that's not a parliamentary function. That is coming through directly from the Constitution with the President and lead the opposition. So we've made some steps forward in terms of the key, PPC, and also police service. So two sensitive areas in terms of rights, in terms of anti-corruption. And so as a new ministry, we're small, as you know, we try to engage with people as much as possible to do representation, and as well as to look at the governance issues, which the President talks all the time about: inclusion, participation, transparency, accountability. And that overlaps with everything government does, but also overlaps with what I do and what this ministry does in terms of our work. So the National Stakeholders Forum, for example, which was set up by President Jack Deo, which used to have 100 NGOs come to, that was abandoned by the former government. And so we are slowly resuscitating that and trying to engage with a number of the NGOs that may not always be consulted by other ministries. So you have ministries that would deal with trade unions and the private sector. A lot of the NGOs I'm trying to incorporate and trying to develop what you call confidence and trust building relations with, are not those big NGOs like private sector and labor, but dealing with the religious organizations, the community organizations, women, youth, Amerindian organizations, and so on, to bring them into the fold of government policy. So we've had discussions on the budget, on the low carbon development strategy. For example, we've had an open forum of just anybody saying what are issues that bother them. Last year, we had on the whole issue of COVID and anti-vaxxing, and trying to work with the religious groups across the board to assist in trying to convince people to get vaccinated. So it's a small intervention. We're going to keep at it to build that, to try to ensure that people feel they have a voice. So if they may not go to certain meetings or invited to certain meetings because that's not their sectoral interest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at Minister Vinaya Prasad. She has a range of NGOs which may cross some of the ones with me, but they may not. But they're dealing with suicide or domestic violence or sexual violence and stuff like that. But I'm dealing with issues that are national, that are political in many cases, social issues that are broader than those specific areas they may be focused on. So to make sure they have a voice, the Council on Persons with Disabilities and stuff. Mm. So I think that, trying to resuscitate that, to get that going. And so the governance issues aren't only treaties. Mm. It's also about how we're engaging at the civil society level with government, trying to build a healthy relationship. It doesn't mean we'll agree all the time, but that a healthy relationship where NGOs feel that they can go to a ministry or they can go to a minister and say, look, these are issues, and they can be heard. Yeah. And you try to then find solutions to them.
So, Minister, if I can ask too, there have been 3 major implementations, yes. And you mentioned one of them, the National Stakeholder Forum. Right. There's also the National Mechanism for Reporting and Follow-Up. Yes. Give me a brief overview of what that mechanism does and how it operates.
One of because my area of treaty reporting is dealing with human rights and anti-corruption, those two. So I don't deal with a lot of the other areas like environment and climate change. That's dealt with like VP and Office of the President. But the whole anti-corruption issue, we set up a national coordinating committee initially to look at what are our treaty responsibilities with the Inter-American Commission Against Corruption, which is the oldest in the world. The oldest convention, in which we have been a part of since 2001, and we are reporting up to now. We were reporting for the 6th time. The UN Convention Against Corruption, which we joined in 2010, and so it began in trying to create a team of people from the various sectors that, one, understand the anti-corruption laws of our country, understand what these treaties are, and not only in terms of just reporting, but to comprehend how they work together as a team in dealing with corruption, whether it is in terms of conflict of interest, whether it's procurement, whether it has to do with oversight, so all the oversight bodies. What came out of that so far is that we had a workshop, a whole day workshop, dealing with the conventions and learning what are the codes of conduct for the judicial officers, for the public servants, for the Integrity Commission, etc. And out of that, we've created a framework, Guyana's framework, anti-corruption framework, which generally nobody thought we had one, until we took all the pieces, the disparate pieces, and created a publication where people can now see we have a constitutional framework, we have a statutory framework, we have administrative measures and functions, and in fact, we have quite a robust anti-corruption framework. The challenges, of course, are implementation and having enough skills, and of course, the prosecutorial area is always the challenge in dealing with some of these issues. So that group is moving, and we're moving now to have another workshop in August to do with civil society and private sector and government in deals with transparency and accountability. So that civil society, private sector, and government must be dealing with transparency and accountability. It's not only government is the enemy up there or the wicked one up there. So these are things we're working on. These are not showy things that, like you open a bridge or you open a road or, nice things like that, or housing schemes. These are the kind of fabric that makes governance and deals with how we're dealing with these issues. The other one on the reporting mechanisms for the human rights treaties, that again is monitoring and again creating institutional memory, what we have found over the years, including what we took over, was that there isn't a lot of institutional memory or institutions, so that people come along and give money to Guyana and say, okay, let's have workshops on human rights. We have workshops on human rights. We have workshops on anti-corruption. But it doesn't stay. This government sector is not involved. The government sector has not been involved or been trained or whatever. So we need, my thing is to train a cadre of people in the government on human rights issues, on the anti-corruption issues. So whether I'm here or not, it doesn't matter. The issue is they've been trained, they are now more aware, they're clear on what they have to do. And so you have some what you call sustainability and continuity. So those are two big issues, the stakeholders I just spoke about. But the issues of looking at our constitutional bodies, we have approached the UN Universal Periodic Review Fund, which we report to, and we did, we're in our fourth report, for assistance in terms of looking at, again, sustainable development of human rights, knowledge in the country and skills in the country. And so we have been given a United Nations volunteer who arrived this week, and the whole area of dealing with the constitutional bodies having the capacity to do their mandate. So we've had ERC, we've had Women and Gender, we have IPC, we have Rights of the Child. In the Committee of Appointment, we have approved the list of entities for ERC and Women and Gender. We're just finishing Rights of the Child. That will go to the Parliament. But that we want to be able to do an examination of how do they work and how can we strengthen them to work, you know. And so to remove ad hocism from it, because they are constitutional bodies mandated by the Constitution to protect human rights. And they can't be arbitrary and they cannot be ad hoc in how they deal with things. And there's a level of that systematically within them. And so we want to be able to develop standards and protocols and procedures that if someone says, I'm discriminated against because I'm this race, and they go to ERC, they have the confidence that the standard and the templates and the complaint mechanisms is the same as if you went and complained. That it's not whether how I look or how I speak or where I come from, that may influence the seriousness with which the criticism is made. So those are all what I call building platforms, building foundations. That what we started years ago, and with all the right intentions and all the constitutional reform, that there's been slippage in terms of how we manage and make sure that the constitutional bodies are a critical component of domestic remedies. So that when we report to the UN and everything, what are the domestic remedies in Guyana? Your rights commissions, if you are being discriminated on race or gender or age or whatever, have they gone to these bodies? Have these bodies fairly dealt with them? Have they dealt with them in a timely manner? Secondly, of course, is the courts. And third, of course, is the Constitutional Court in terms of these are human rights if there are claims of violation. So that these are bodies that have to hold up the standard, and that will build confidence of Guyanese and the trust in them that they will be fairly treated. And so this manipulation that goes on in the social media and by the political leaders and the opposition leader and Mr. David Hines and everybody of milking this issue and constantly using race as a divisive tool. And don't say to people, if you are discriminated, go to ethnic relations, go to the courts, go to here. There are several layers of our society that we built in the constitutional reform in 2001. Why don't they tell people that? They don't tell the people because they want people to not have knowledge, not have facts, and to be able to milk this level of victimology all the time, which is based on quicksand. And so one of the things of this government with governance, which isn't strictly under me, but it's a policy of this government of how are we dealing with people in our country. We know what happened before. We know what happened in the last 5 years. We know what happened with land in the last 5 years. We know what happened in the housing sector in the last 5 years. We know, we saw it, all of us saw it in the country of who got land, who got a road fix, who got a bridge fix. And so, since we've come into office, whether it is hampers being delivered for COVID, whether it's COVID cash relief, the first one, now the second one, whether it is the payment to the health workers, whether it is the salary increase, whether it is the cash care program, whether it's the pensioners increase, whether it is now the new one to do with children with disabilities. No one can say that we're leaving out a community. We're not leaving out any communities that everybody's getting. So the miners get assistance, which may not be relevant to the fishermen. The fishermen get assistance, which may not be relevant to the guys who are farming, who need the fertilizers. So this attempt to bifurcate the country and split people up into little pieces, that, oh, why are you giving the farmers fertilizers, but you're not giving X? But being very wicked, if I want to say that word, to say, well, are they saying farmers are only one ethnic group in this country? Of course not. When they say sugar workers are one ethnic group, that's nonsense. They obviously don't know the sugar industry. They have no idea what the sugar industry is. Yes, it's majority Indo-Guyanese, but it's not exclusively Indo-Guyanese. And they know it, but they're misinforming the people. So a lot of issues to do with discrimination. I believe that a well-informed population is the best protection against these attempts to manipulate and divide our people. The issue of inclusion, of participation. Look, I've been in government from '92, and I must say from 2020 August, there's no PPP government, no opposition, well, no APNU government, definitely, who have been so visible, so accessible, no time in our history, no time since we've been an independent country. The presence of ministers and the attempt to belittle that, to say, well, they're just going to do handouts, so this is wickedness again. Because when we're going to different areas, whether it is PPP supported, APNU supported, we are going out to people. People are raising the issues. We can't solve every issue that is there. Some are private matters, have to go to court and stuff like that. But the fact that for every community we go to, we have a system in the government where notes are taken, issues are raised, information's taken, what their telephone numbers are, and that goes into a monitoring mechanism we've developed, which allows us to track. Okay, so we went to Buxton a couple of weeks ago, or we went to Charity a few weeks ago. What are the issues raised? And there's a whole monitoring mechanism that says, Shaquan Gill raised the fact that, he hasn't got his NIS or his pension. And we have to track each one of those cases and contact the person and say, look, we've been able to get NIS, your matter is resolved, or we haven't been able to resolve, we need more documents from you. And that is a detailed and an innovation of this government in terms of governance. I'm not in charge of it. It's at Office of the President. But it is a tool of governance that is critical, so that we just don't go into a meeting, we have meetings and we leave and we forget. It is to make sure we're human as ministers, we're human as technical people, that we record, we put into a database by area, and we can say, what are the issues? Issues with the roads or the culverts or the garbage, or their individual cases to do with old age pension, to do with disabilities. Each one has to be tracked. Up to today, I have areas which they may raise in a community areas to do with me. I'm not at the meeting, but I'm alerted by the monitoring group. This issue was raised in Myconi, that is an area of yours. And so I now have to contact those people and call them and say, what is the issue? Could you explain more to me? And then I have a responsibility to follow up. And then I enter into the database and put in what is the response. And every week the president gets a report on this. How are we doing? We made promises to do roads, or we promised to do this in a particular area. Are we doing it as a government? Are we responding? And this area of governance, I think, we don't even recognize in our country.
And so we spoke extensively about governance and how government
Yeah.
has been doing really well in that regard. Let's turn a little bit to your other sector, the parliamentary affairs aspect. One of your responsibilities specifically is to ensure and manage the diverse
Yes.
affairs of government. What does that mean, and how has the government been doing in relation to that?
My responsibility is to make sure that the government business, whether it's bills, whether it's motions, whether it is answering questions from the opposition, whether it is committees functioning and those that aren't functioning, I have to monitor that and manage it, and to make sure that we are moving in a organized manner. So there's a cabinet subcommittee on bills where the draft bills come in. We have meetings, discussions, we fine tune it. It goes back to cabinet, so that by the time a bill comes to Parliament, it has gone through a process of consultation within the cabinet members, but also with organizations outside. So a number of bills, for example, the one on mental health would have gone through inclusion of technical people, experts, and NGOs that may be involved with mental health. The issues with, for example, the Bail Act, or the bail bill, or the evidence bill, which is before the House now. The Attorney General would have been dealing with the Bar Association. In fact, I met one of the Bar Association members who's on the committee of the Bar that deals with new legislation. And they said they can't keep up with us. You know, we're keeping them busy, which is good. We need their opinion. We need their response. And so my response is to make sure that when the agenda is planned for Parliament, that I have my people, my MPs ready, my ministers ready, that we come out well organized, and we strategize before the Parliament how we're going to manage. And so that's an important part, my coordination with the clerk or with the clerks of committee in terms of getting work done. And I don't have any problems. I get cooperation, and they assist. And also my responsibility too, I have new MPs to make sure they become familiar with the standing orders, that if they have any problems that we work on how to resolve it. Motions have to be drafted a number of times. I do those myself. And so it's a good area of work. Of course, in this Parliament, like in the last Parliament, unfortunately, there's not much collaboration between the opposition and government. And so in the last Parliament, Amna Ali was the chief whip, I was the chief whip for the opposition. But we've known each other for a long time. So I can spar and she can spar, and that's fine. And I knew that when she said no to certain things, that's her political direction she's getting. So we could not do certain things. Unlike in other parliaments where the opposition and government have been able to reach agreement on different issues. We've actually amended bills on the floor or before it goes back in. That is out of the question now. There's no possibility to do that now. To be able to sit down with an opposition member and say they don't like this part of the bill. Despite, on the Natural Resources Bill, Mr. Patterson brought 14 amendments on the eve of the bill being debated. I think it's 10 of the 14 amendments we approved on the floor. That does not seem to have had any impact on the opposition in terms of their view of the Natural Resources Bill as amended. And of course with local content, they didn't participate. But the issue is that the kind of thing that took place years ago, where you had terrible fights on the floor, but never what we saw on December 29th, and never what we've seen in January this year. And that's, we may have been very argumentative, but never to that level, or descend to that level of mayhem. So that social dialogue, that's not there. And that harms the Parliament. It undermines the Parliament. But we as a government, and my responsibility is to make sure as a Minister for Government, Business in Parliament, that what we need to get through, we're able to get through. And so one has to look at the various attempts sometimes to prevent you from bringing forward, like with the Natural Resources Bill that day. The whole attempt was to ensure that bill didn't pass, wasn't finished, debated and passed. They didn't succeed in that. So that area of strategizing is important in terms of Parliament. how organized we are, how clear we are, and where we're going. And that's my responsibility, make sure government business goes through and that we are not stymied, that important pieces of legislation are held up. And so even things like the budget and so on, to make sure that is managed. So those are a number of things between my parliamentary responsibility and what are my ministerial responsibilities. And I think that for Parliament, we've really come out with a combination of really interesting bills in terms of those that relate to social issues and those who are the hardcore issues like the Sovereign Welfare Fund, the ones that have come out on the condominium. So you have a combination of bills that are dealing with transformation, like the condominium bill, which is totally new. The mental health one, which is coming up, which is dealing with an issue that we as Guyanese have been reluctant to deal with for years. Yeah. We didn't want to deal with mental health. We didn't want to deal with that issue. The issues with the adoption of children in other jurisdictions. Mm. This is to bring us in line with the Hague Convention on the prevention of abduction and kidnapping of children for the purposes of adoption. So there's a combination, what some of them may be related to human rights, others that have to do with transformation, of facilitating the transformative agenda of the government. And so even the softer areas like the amendment to the birth certificate registration, to allow for people who have never been registered to get registered without having to go to the court. It's an enormous issue in the interior. Mm-hmm. You know, because how do they go to court? How are they going to go to the court? Yeah. You know, you've got people in their 60s and 70s, never had a birth certificate. They're going to die without a name, basically, on any record. Mm-hmm. They're born and die, and there's no record of their existence. And so that injustice, you must have an identity as a person. Your name is your identity, your birth date. And so that whole area of that bill coming out, that an amendment, which is really impacting on riverine and interior people. Mm-hmm. It can, because in the towns it's less problem, although you do encounter from time to time. So that whole area of people being able of late registration, of also even death certificates, because in many parts of the interior you don't get a death certificate. Mm. You know, sometimes because there's no birth certificate, but also sometimes the whole process of getting it, and so people don't worry about it. But it's important that we ensure that we make it easier. There are cases of in our society where we have many fathers unstated on birth certificates, and a child discovers their mother has one name which doesn't fit because they're a boy. Mm-hmm. So we've had these instances where the mother's Chatrawati. How does the boy become John Chatrawati? Yeah. Chatra is a female name. Right. So then what name does that become? So in fact that allows, the amendment allows a person who's reached 18 to be able to name themselves. Right. And it also allows, the new consideration of course is in relation to naming where the parents don't have the same name. They may be married or they may not be married. And the issue is what name is on the child. It's not automatically the father anymore. That the parents decide that which name they want to put. And in the case where the father is unstated, the mother can give the child a surname, her own or another surname. And it doesn't have to be connected to who she thinks may be the biological father. Mm. But these are quite radical interventions, and the fact that you don't have to go to court now. You don't have to go to court to get your name because you didn't get it 20 years ago or you didn't get it 5 years ago. So these are important. That's a big issue in terms of trying to ensure, and if you saw the NTC, mm-hmm. the booth that was there with the registrar's office, right. And the volume of requests for birth certificates, from the very old to, you know, children that are 5 years old and stuff like that. So that whole issue, that amendment has opened up, and so the two-shop can sign now. Or in some areas where there's no two-shop, it's not an Indian village, the headmaster or community leader, CDC head or something, can say, look, this guy knows Shakwan. He's been here in the village for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. He's real. He's not a newcomer, or he's not fictitious in any way. So that, to try to expedite that process, Because if you don't have a birth certificate, you can't get an ID card.
Right.
How do you do business in a modern world without any form of identification? It's impossible. So that softer issue of transformation is important. You know, the whole area that the government has been doing in terms of helping small contractors to get registered, to be able to compete in small contracts, the wavering of compliance in these issues for Amerindian villages, procuring, bidding for small contracts in the villages. These are in a sense affirmative actions for people. They have a human rights base because it's saying that if we continued without doing these things, then they're forever locked out. They can't get in, they can't compete, they can't grow, right, because they forever will be locked out. And so these interventions, which never make much headway or sensation in the press, actually is very focused on helping the small man, the small communities, the people to be able to grow. And you have to give them the tools to grow. You have to get your birth certificate. If you don't have a birth certificate, you can't get an ID card, you can't get a TIN card, you can't get an old age pension, you can't get your NIS, you can get nothing. Right. And so there's a whole wash of people in this country who are denied that. So these bills that I think come out, maybe we're not making the case enough, or we're not explaining that enough, but these small interventions are big interventions. And the radical one of the president, to do with children with disabilities, is an enormous thing, because for years there really hasn't been that assistance for children with disabilities. And what we've discovered in this whole process, and the number of children who are autistic, the children who are Down syndrome, the children, so people always think of disabilities as the physical disabilities. Right, yeah. And you're finding now and so these are children who need help, who can get the technical support. So outside of the cash grant to them, I think this exercise we've gone through in every village, every part of Guyana, that it will allow us now to have data that says, look, what kind of interventions do we need more teachers with special needs training to deal with children who have special needs? And where should we put them? Because we're noticing in this cluster, you may have a higher number than in another area. Right, right. So these are tools that are all part of governance, of looking at how do we, in a very informed way, be able to make decisions that will improve people's lives.
So, Minister, taking all of that into consideration, how would you describe the government's vision for transformation, for development, the overall development of Guyana?
Well, I think the president says it far better than I could ever say it. But I think, if I answer you a little bit differently, this country, and I think I've said it before, having gone through personally, and I'll talk slightly personally now, sure, having gone through all the struggles for democracy, my youth, which I don't have now, all my youth for struggle for democracy, free and fair elections, and then getting into government in '92, and the struggles of the PPP in government from '92 to up to 2008, with the violence, with the fact that we were bankrupt, that we didn't have money, and then by 2006 things we begin to breathe a bit economically, but of course we had the crime wave. This is the first time, if you trace the history of our country, this is the first time in our history that we as Guyanese have the right to dream and to realize our dreams. And I think sometimes we have to pinch ourselves, because people say, for true, the president talking so, we can get a hotel, we can get new pediatric maternal hospital, we can get a road going through the back, we can get this. Sometimes I think as Guyanese, we have had such a hard time. We've gone through such difficulties, such trauma, such sometimes travesty, that we sometimes can't think positive. So we always have this little negative thing. Is for true? You think he could do it? Is he going to do it? Will the government do it? Can they do it? It's always this, we're second guessing.
Yeah.
And I think even though we are second guessing, many of our people are, they're seeing on a weekly basis change. They're seeing things changing. They're seeing that when ministers come in and we promise we're coming back to do X and Y, within a week's time, 2 weeks' time, they're seeing that, yeah, they're coming with the bulldozer, they're coming with the excavator, whatever it is. People are getting phone calls to say, could you come in, we've been able to resolve your NIS problem, or that go into housing because your application 5 years ago is now being addressed and stuff. So at the individual level, people are feeling the change. The gold scholarships where young people applied last year, and I'm getting notes from some things showing me copies of the certificate they passed, they did well, they got distinction. And this is the impact at the individual, human level.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it is again saying to us that we've had this vision about our country, whether it's men talking over a drink or a wedding house or wake house. We've all, as Guyanese, wanted this country to go for. We know this country could do it. We know it. We've got the resources outside of oil. But we've gone through such, sometimes like a yo-yo. We're making progress and we come back down. And we make progress and we go back down. This is the first time, and I'm saying it as an older person, as they say, a senior citizen, is that, although I prefer mature citizen, but anyway, that this is the first time that we can breathe.
Yeah.
And that there is we can see that the dreams can be realized. You know, little bit, as they say, one dirty build dam, that we can do it little bit by little bit, so that the doubting Thomases around us and those who want to keep us back, keep us somewhere backwards, don't go forward, that people are resisting that. People want to live in this country. They want to stay in Ghana. They're watching what's going on in other parts of the world too. But people are saying that this is a place to invest in. For 5 years we were on, you know, when you pause a remote, we were paused. People didn't know whether, if they had a house lot, whether they should start building or not. Whether they should use that money for that or use the money to save up to go get a visa and get out of the country. We were 5 years on pause. Everybody holding their line and watching what's coming next and trying to prepare for the worst and hoping for the best. That 2020, by being able to show the power of our people, the power of the leadership of particularly my government and the PPP, that we were able to push this country into a new dimension now. And the challenge, of course, is that our own ability as a government to produce, to guide, to give the leadership, and I think that is clear from the president down, that is what is happening. And that we're not saying to people you must all vote for the PPP. Of course we'd like them if they did, but I mean, that's their choice. But regardless of who you vote for, how do we make our country work? How do we make the community level? How do we build relations at the community level so that they do things to develop their community, regardless of when they go into the polling booth or they vote for? And so I think this is a very, from a political science point of view, from a political point of view, this is a really, really fascinating time for young people, in particular people like you. It is your time. This is your time, and the opportunities are immense, and it's important for young people to realize, to grasp them. Take a chance, take a risk, you know, and for the not so old, that to invest all their experience and to make this country go forward. Because when I look around more and more and I see other countries, you know, this is such a special country with all our problems, but also always the potential that we can overcome this. And so when I listen to the speeches at Burnham Park, you get annoyed, but I really feel sad. I feel sad that there's a political party out there who speaks with such vitriol, such hatred and bitterness. How can they become leaders of a country? no matter what you feel as a leader, your focus must be on building a country, not tearing it apart. And so when I listen to the vitriol, and I know some of those speakers rather well, that they cannot lead the country with such bitterness and hatred. You can only lead when you can find a way to bring people together and to move the power of people. Because when people are working in some level of collaboration, even if they don't like each other much or they don't agree with each other, but there's some collaboration, the country begins to immediately move forward. And that's what we're seeing in the last 2 years. This country is moving forward. One, you have a leadership of President Ali, Vice President, and the cabinet who are moving every day and working at a terrific rate. But you also have the building of trust with the population, a building and the housing programs, all these things we're doing to say, look, this is for everyone. Yeah. But not everything is for everyone. But we are doing everything for everyone. And so I think that it's a really, really special time, and we have to guard it. Just like we guarded in 2020, we must guard this. We have to guard this period. We have to guard this period to make sure nobody comes along and tries to put up, what you call a hurdle to stop us as a people. And we have to make sure that we have to be on guard to protect our gains, just like we did in 2020, to make sure the will of the people, that who voted for who was counted. We went through a recount, we went through 5 months of delay, and it showed a level of resilience and discipline of our people that was astronomical. It was unbelievable. And I think that whole experience is what is now impacting on us today as well, and saying we can overcome one of the worst situations of our country. And so now it's an issue of trying to build and to transform. And I think Guyanese want to be able to say, we got a new pediatric hospital, it's a modern hospital. I remember years ago with the National Stadium when we had World Cup cricket, and we decided as a cabinet to bid, and I was a Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport, and we had a broad team to prepare for World Cup cricket and the bid, and there were a lot of naysayers in the group that said, Guyana can never get a bid. We will never be selected by the International Cricket Council. We don't have this, we don't have this, we're not good enough. And we went in and we got. And then, of course, the issue was that, we can't do this, we can't do that. And when the stadium went up, there were a lot of negative things when we got the Exim loan from India. This will never be a run time, we'll never do this. And we had the stadium, and people walked into the stadium for World Cup cricket and were mesmerized that this was ours. This was a world-class stadium, particularly the ground, which never floods, unlike borders. So it's those, I think, images of where people see there's change, there's improvement. And you fly over parts of Guyana, you're seeing the houses going up in rows for the houses that are built. Everybody wants to be able to have a nice house to live in. Who doesn't? And so this is a fascinating period, and I hope that those who wish to stop the progress will recognize what a dangerous game they're playing, because it's not an issue of whether they lead the country or not. It's the country and its ability to be transformed so that all of us as Guyanese benefit, all our people benefit, the next generation benefits, and most of all, young people like you.
Minister Teixeira, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us on this program.
Okay, thank you.
That has been Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, Minister Gail Teixeira, and this has been The Journey to Prosperity for All. I'm your host, Shaquan Gill, saying goodbye for now.